Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of B2B Revealed. B2B Revealed brings you the best of B2B. Whether you're a B2B seller, a B2B marketer, or simply a B2B leader, this show can provide you the tools and insights you need to be successful. My name's Sean Campbell, and I'm your host. I love to hear from listeners. If you have any questions about the show, or you'd like to suggest a topic I should cover in the future, you can email me at sean@cascadeinsights.com. Finally, if you love this show, don't forget to give us a review on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you happen to listen. On this episode, I'll be interviewing Steve Smith, who specializes in helping companies with sales, marketing, and leadership challenges. On this episode, we'll be talking to him about the challenges that services firms, in particular IT services firms, have when it comes to doing effective sales and marketing efforts. In short, I'm sure you're going to love hearing what Steve has to say about the world of professional services firms. Also, as a side note, over the next 4 to 6 interviews on the show, you'll notice a bit of variance in the audio quality from interview to interview because I'm experimenting with a few different audio services to record those interviews, including IPDTL, Zencaster, Ringer, and Skype. Once I give each one a run for their money, I'll let you know which one I found out to be the best. And now, on to the show. Steve, welcome to the show.
Sean, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So tell the listeners a little bit about your background. I gave a little bit of an intro at the kickoff to the show, but why don't you walk through that in a little more detail?
Well, most of my formal career was in consumer products manufacturing. And I had worked with just tremendous national companies that were just at the top of their game in mostly consumable, sometimes durable goods. And that's really where I learned the things that I coach businesses on today, leadership capabilities and how to manage organizations and smooth out processes and things like that. And then if the company happens to be in need of marketing, it's really all strategy based. So I draw a lot from where I came from. But I started this in 2008, and the amount of things that I have learned and developed in that 9-year span almost equals the 30 years I lived previously.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about the work you've done for IT-focused services firms, because I think the work you've done there is interesting, and I also think that's not a market that hears a lot about how to operationalize things better, how to do marketing better, how to do sales better. If you're a product company, you'll get a lot of advice and books you can look at. Services firms tend to get a little less. And then especially if you're a particular type of services firm, it can be really hard to get good advice. Before we get into that, though, tell me a little bit about the work you've done with IT-focused services firms.
The companies I've worked with that have been in the IT sector or engineering sector, very technically based work, has largely been on leadership and management. And it's really involved around once someone starts a business, and maybe they started on their own, they're a solo practitioner, and at some point the business starts to grow and they bring this person in and that person in, and one day they wake up and they realize they've got a team of 20 people working for them, and they've never really figured out how to harness that collective expertise from those 20 people because people is not the area that they're good at. They haven't spent a lot of time learning about it, practicing it, being comfortable. And so that becomes their Achilles heel. And so most of the IT or technology businesses I work with are focused directly on that leadership and management of people.
Yeah, those are really good points because I think a lot of times, and I imagine this is part of where you're going, is that these IT-focused firms, they started out because somebody was, for lack of a better phrase, given I'm a bit of a geek too, right? They were geeks, right? They started out and they had a lot of expertise and technical ability.
Yes.
30 years ago, that would have been in COBOL, and now it's in advanced analytics and stitching together big data and Internet of Things. But whatever that is, that's where they were good. And you could probably say the same thing about if they were an architecture or an engineering firm, right? They were really good at building bridges or something like that. And then all of a sudden they have people and sales process and marketing process and organizations to run. And to your point, maybe they're not good at people. And especially if they don't have a co-founder that's maybe good at the people side, let's say.
That's right. And for all folks that are highly technically experienced, that's their mindset, that's kind of how they see the world. In their immediate life, it's basically them and the software, or them and the hardware, or them and the code, or them and whatever networking stream they've learned how to work in and feel comfortable in. And at some point when they become a business, now they have to be equally as good at them and their people. Them and their employees, them and their customers, them and their other suppliers. That, quite honestly, and I can say this with a lot of assurity, it's the people side that usually drags the business down. If they could make all the money they could ever spend and not hire one person to do it all themselves, most of them would do that. But usually business requires scaling. And at some point, other people have to be doing things on your behalf. And that's usually where things start to get rocky.
So what does a business look like that's having those kind of challenges? When you walk in the front door, virtually or otherwise, right, and you start talking to the leader or the leadership team, what are some signs that they've neglected the people side of the problem?
The first thing I see, without question, is when you walk into that workplace environment, what you see is almost no collaboration. Everybody is really kind of embedded in their workstation. And they might be hard at work on their own computer. They might be on the phone with a client trying to diagnose a problem. But they're all kind of doing things very independently. And the owner is standing off to the side, kind of like that kid back in high school or junior high that was saying, put me in, coach, put me in. You know, they want to get in, but they don't know a way to get in. They don't know a way to engage their own people. So they kind of talk about like it's in a third person conversation. And so I get that almost immediately. For people who have stayed in that situation for any length of time, they now start going through what I call mind drift. And it's basically, gee, I wake up in the morning, I know I have a business to run, but I'd really rather not go there. Let me think of what other things I can occupy my time with. And maybe if I show up after lunch, everything will be fine. And so they get away from the business long enough to where things start to break down inside. And when they break down, it's never the hardware. You know, hardware breaks, computers need to be replaced, but that's an easy fix. The breakdown is when people don't work with each other, or people start undermining each other, or people do things to undercut or to try to get advantage on somebody else. So they're not working as a team towards a common goal. They're all in there for themselves.
What's your typical first step with a team like that? I mean, if you walk in and you see that kind of behavior, it's not clear to that owner that it's happening. Otherwise, they probably would have tried to fix it. How do you kind of bring that to the surface?
Well, the first thing that I do is I sit down with the owner and I say, tell me why you started this business. What was it you were looking at down the road that made you choose this occupation? What I'm attempting to do is kind of dig the original story out of them so I can figure out why they decided to do this. At some point, almost all of them have kind of a vision or a dream of where they thought this would end up. And that's usually where the disconnect comes in. Somewhere that vision or that dream has gotten cloudy. Now they can't remember a lot of the detail, or maybe it's just completely gone altogether. But what we really have to do is piece that dream back together and say, we have to have a vision of what your future looks like, whether it's 12 months from now, 5 years from now, or when you finally decide to retire and offload the thing. But 12 months is easier to deal with than 10 years. So it's like, okay, tell me where you want this thing to be, and don't worry about what you haven't been able to do. Here's a clean sheet of paper with nothing on it. Write down on this what you want it to look like in 12 months. We can always put some reality to it and figure out what phases or what steps need to happen in order for it to get there. But before I can help you with that, I need to know where you want to go. Because if you don't know where you want to go, any place you end up is going to be okay.
And that's a great way of putting it. And I've seen a lot of business owners end up exactly that way. That's a really nice way of putting it. Tell me a little bit then about what are some of the marketing and sales challenges these kinds of companies face, because that's kind of a people side that they face. You know, they're not really engaged with their team's not collaborating, but I imagine you also see a lot of marketing and sales challenges too.
Yes, and the marketing challenges are fairly deep and fairly common. By the way, it could be an IT firm, it could be a law office, it could be a medical practice, it could be some manufacturing company, okay? Everybody pretty much has this problem. The longer you've been in your business or your occupation or your particular trade, the more you start thinking and speaking in trade talk. You use certain jargon, you use certain acronyms and things that everybody in your immediate circle knows about because that's the way you talk every day. The problem with marketing is another language. It's a communication device for you to reach out and touch people in the marketplace who might very well need your help. They just don't know about you because they've not met you yet. So too many times what they do is they start to market and they start to speak to the consumer or to the client, the other business owner who may not be a tech person at all. He needs tech help, but he's not a tech company. And they start speaking to them in tech talk and it doesn't translate well. So what happens is a lot of the message gets diluted. And so they don't really get the full impact of what they can really do that this other company really needs. So the communication, the way they kind of cultivate and spread the messages is a big problem. The other problem with the sales end of it is that, let's face it, to be a salesperson, you've got to be willing to engage on a face-to-face basis or a phone-to-phone basis. But if you're not willing to engage proactively and have a conversation and find out what people need, what they're not getting that they want, and then figure out how to be the solution for their problem, you're not going to close a sale. And so most of the people that are really, really good at tech they're not good at face-to-face or phone-to-phone talking with people just to understand what that person's problem is. So it's all communication, whether it's marketing communication or sales communication, the communication piece and using that to bridge relationships and be able to understand what people really need so you can figure out if you have what they want. That's it in a nutshell.
So let's talk about the communication bit. I mean, there's a lot of that we could get into, but on the communication side, having had a little bit of time talking to technical people over my career too, I find that they're challenged to believe that communication is important. If you said data is important, or if you said a spreadsheet's important, or if you said a pivot table is important, or an API is important, they're all going to believe that's really important. But if you say just simply communication, especially when it doesn't appear to immediately generate a positive result, I think they're a little challenged to see how that plays out. So how do you coach these folks to value something that to some degree they might be inherently inclined to always put lower on the priority list?
In all of those things that you mentioned, whether it's data, whether it's charts, whether it's anything else that provides information, to me, that is a communication channel that goes one way. It's the information coming to the technology individual. They can sit there and think about it and decide what to do with it and how to apply it, but there's no back and forth. When you get to other individuals, now you've got to be able to hold yourself in a two-way conversation, and that's where many of these folks, they don't feel comfortable. That's really all it boils down to. Most of them, I sit and talk with them for 10, 15 minutes just to find out kind of who they are and what they do, what drives them, what they think they're really good at. They have no problem explaining it or having a two-way conversation because they don't think of casual conversation and business conversation as having anything to do with each other. So when you put somebody in a situation where there's something on the line, there's a client that's called in and said, gee, I'd like to have an appointment. I'd like to come in and have you tell us what you do because we might need your service. That's where they start getting a little fidgety. Or somebody calls in on the phone and says, I saw something on the internet and I decided to call you. Now all of a sudden they have to engage. And that's where most of them have difficulty. So what I tell all of them is you have to get out of your own head. If you stay in your own head way too long, your head will be your biggest competition. So you really have to just kind of put those down and just think about you're talking to your brother. You're talking to your college roomie or somebody like that. And you want to be respectful. You want to have a certain amount of business acumen that lets people know that you're professional. But at the same time, don't set your own expectations for a conversation so high that you can't engage.
Those are really good points. So let's go back to the marketing discussion for a minute. You mentioned something that I think is really important is that they need to not talk in technical speak. And I have to admit, even some of our larger technology accounts, they are victims of this. They do this all the time. Now, sometimes they may be doing it for the right reasons because maybe they are making a very technical sale to a very, very technical audience. So there's certainly some times to do that. But to your point, the broader sale, selling the organization itself on you, it doesn't necessarily really boil down to all those technical parameters. So what's your process for getting them to change? Because I imagine a lot of this is like changing their website, changing the way they talk to customers. It's changing even the people they target for sales. That's probably changing the kind of buyer personas they go after and know how to go after different ones. So it sounds like a pretty massive challenge. So how do you walk through that with these types of companies?
Where I start is just getting them comfortable with the human dynamic. Any organization that you do business with, I don't care who it is, at some point, somebody is going to have to say yes. Somebody's going to have to sign the contract. Somebody's going to have to put in the deposit or pay the retainer or do something of that nature. I mean, we've done tremendous things in the last 10, 20 years in terms of automating a lot of low-level, menial, repetitive type tasks. But all that means is that the things that are left are now almost exclusively the property of someone else. So start just recognizing that if you're going to be a successful tech business owner or tech professional of any kind, you got to wear two hats. One hat is technology focused. The other hat is people focused. And if you can get comfortable with that, and especially when you're talking about making your initial way into a prospective business that you think you can help and they're interested in hearing more, part of it is just sizing up who you're dealing with. Sure, the president of the company may be the one that makes those kinds of decisions. That may not be the first person you have a conversation with. You might have the conversation with the IT director or the CTO or somebody who now is going to be able to speak in your terms, but still is going to want to hear things in their terms. So it's really about putting yourself in their position and say, okay, if I was sitting there listening to me, what would I want to hear about? And that means if at some point you're going to talk to an operations manager that doesn't know anything about what you do, they only know what happens when the stuff you work on doesn't work right. Now you've got to sit there and think about, okay, what is it they're going to be interested in hearing about? And you've just got to be able to kind of shift the focus of how you talk. The greatest way to do this is if you have a family. Let's just say you're a guy, you have a wife, you have a couple of kids, you've got a boy and a girl. You're going to be having conversations all day long on the weekends, and every single one of those people you talk to, you're going to talk to differently. You might not be aware of it in the moment, but the conversations you have with your wife about a whole host of household matters or her career matters or whatever are going to be distinctly different than the conversation you have with your son and the conversation you have with your daughter. And you just got to take that same mindset and say, okay, my clients are no different. They're individuals, they're humans, they have a role to play in this organization. I just need to be able to size up what that is so I know how to have the best conversation with them.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. So on that point, let's talk a little bit about, especially this family analogy, which in other circles we don't think of our family as buyer personas, right? Because that's more of a personal thing. But you're basically talking about they target different buyer personas, right? These organizations. And so I liked what you said about the operations manager. They go in there and this person is evaluating what they're offering based on a very kind of business set of requirements. And I imagine you've seen a lot of this where these firms now are engaging with business decision makers to buy the technology stack, right? Because they're offering a cloud service or they're offering something that doesn't really require the level of IT investment it used to, right? Now, on one hand, that's an advantage to that firm because then they can sell to a broader set of people. But to your point, I imagine that they struggle the minute they have to kind of sell predominantly to the business unit versus, let's say, the IT director.
Yes. And in fact, when I work with teams of people in IT software or mainframe remote support type companies, the thing I'll have them sit down and do is I'll say, okay, each one of you guys has a specialty, right? Yes, everybody they nod their head there. And then I'll say, okay, in 30 seconds, tell me what it is that you do. And that right there is a challenge. So what I'm really trying to figure out is, are they clear enough in their own head to be able to get it out crisply, cleanly, and in a short period of time? So we go through that. The next thing I do is I say, okay, each one of you people, write down on a piece of paper in front of you all the things that what you do has benefit to your client. And I said, if anything you write on that paper is not a benefit to the client, but it's a convenience or a feature for you, we're going to scratch it off. So I'm forcing them to think in their client's shoes. Because once you get good at that and you get good at understanding what the client's needs are as opposed to what you do to fulfill them, then it's easier to start talking to them in those terms. And every service provider, doesn't matter what you provide, whether it's technical or non-technical, you are going to live or die based on your ability to talk in terms of what the client sees as a value.
Yeah, that's an awesome point and a really nice exercise because I imagine a lot of the times you take an analytical staff or a technical staff and you say, so all the stuff you do all week, what does it actually have business value? Like picture a title in an organization we work with. And I imagine probably sometimes those lists are a little short at the start, I would guess.
Yes, or they're filled with a lot of things that when you go through and you say, okay, you wrote this down, what does that exactly mean? What you find out is it's something that they do well, which, okay, that's good. It's good they understand what their value is to the company, but it's getting them to understand and translate that value to what's meaningful to the client.
Well, one quick follow-up there. So do you typically take like the output of that exercise once it gets good and you've got good lists, does that kind of then roll right into kind of maybe the marketing advice you give them to say like, hey, now we've uncovered really brass tacks wise the things that actually are like really valuable to your clients?
Yes, because in some cases in the company that I just finished up with here in May, the owner of the business basically was the main sales guy. He would go out and make the calls. He would do the door knocking. He just liked that. He liked interfacing with clients. What he didn't like doing was running the shop. And that's kind of where the problem was. That's what I was brought in on. But what I realized was he was a very interesting combination. He loved dealing with his clients, the business people, the ones that needed his service. So he had an ability to connect on a human basis with the clients. And he was a tech guy. I mean, he built this business because of what he knew how to do. He just wasn't interested in making that same connection with the folks in-house.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I imagine you see kind of parallels like that a lot. You already mentioned the one about they're maybe great at relating to the staff because they're kind of talking to people like themselves, but then they're challenged on the outside. But I hadn't thought about that model too, that he should just outsource himself as business development for somebody else, I guess, at that point is pretty much what he should do.
Well, he had grown the business to about 1.8 million, and he had a staff of 6 people that were doing a lot of the remote monitoring and fixes and things of that nature. But deep down inside, what really drove him was closing deals and acquiring clients where he could say, okay, this client now is going to be worth $50,000 for this year, or they're on a monthly retainer kind of thing for backup service. So he was all into the numbers, and he was all into getting clients because a client to him was something he could convert to money, to revenue. In-house, all of his folks, which he needed, he liked them all. But what he didn't like was all of the human side of working in an office or in a factory or some other kind of facility. Eventually, people wear on each other. People do things that other people don't like. People get into disputes, arguments. Sometimes it escalates to conflict. And people that are just not naturally drawn to helping folks solve problems and get back to working together will avoid that like the plague.
So what kind of advice did you give a guy like that?
We tried two things, and I worked on him for probably 4 or 5 months to help him reengage with his business, more from a managerial standpoint, understanding what each one of his people did well, setting some guidelines and some performance standards, and then just monitoring how everybody did. And occasionally you might have to pull somebody in the office and say, look, one of our standards is your time card's got to be in by 5 o'clock on Friday or you're not going to get paid. And this one person just religiously never does it. So their check's always a week late. So, I mean, that kind of stuff, it seems tedious, but when it happens, especially in a state like California, it can cause you problems. This state is just layered upon layers of regulation for businesses to have to operate. So that was the kind of thing that he really didn't like. And so what we tried to do is put together an operating structure that he was comfortable with, that everybody else knew about, and all he would have to do is kind of watch it to make sure it stayed within the guardrails. And he just didn't take to that. So finally, I said, what do you want to do? And he says, well, I just want to hire somebody. Have somebody come in here, run it for me, and I'll stay outside and find the clients and do that. Great. So they found a guy, brought him in. Biggest mistake in the world. The guy was very nice. He was very knowledgeable, but he was a tech guy that didn't have any management experience. And so all they did was add another layer between the workforce and the owner that had the same limitations as the owner had.
Yeah, I imagine that didn't turn out too well for them. So what was the end result at that point? Because I've seen that kind of thing play out before, right? But what happened in that case?
Well, at some point, and I went to the owner and said, look, I have done everything that I know how to do to get somebody kind of oriented and thinking in a different direction at a level now that's different than having your hands on the keyboard. And now you've got to be out in front of everybody else and kind of setting the pace and taking the initiative on things to make sure projects start and stop at the same time. And, all this stuff happens. And I said, he just doesn't have it. He might get it at some point in the future. I just don't think he has it now to help you in the now. If you're willing to work on him for another year or two, maybe he'll get there. But if you want to know if he's ready now, no, he's not. So they ended up letting him go. And what the owner came back to me and said was, you know what? I have to get back into the business. I now see that I'm the only one that can do this. And I said, you're right. Your company is you. You started it. You named it. You're the face of it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be tied to it for the rest of your life. But right now, when you're in a building phase, there's somebody has to have their hands on the wheel, and that's you.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote I've said often. There's a quote, Michael Gerber of the E-Myth Revisited. That's about at some point you need to go from working in the business to on it when he's talking about growth. But at the same time, what you're talking about is the corollary to it, I've said, because I've grown 2 businesses, right? When you have to straddle the two, there's a lot of pressure at that point. When you're in that middle 5 to 10 employees and you're going, I need to be in it, but I also need to be on it. And I'd like to say too, and I think you'd agree with this because you worked in larger companies before starting your consulting firm. I think you see the same thing inside large companies when somebody goes from being the individual contributor to becoming basically the guy who's got a team of 2 or 3. And then they have a team of 5 or 10. And then things sometimes for those folks break down. And it's why their careers flatline, I think, because they're stuck between this in-on model. And they either become this super duper contributor, but they don't really manage their team well, or they focus on managing the team like in this kind of outward sense. They're always promoting the team, but the team's like, hey, where's my help? And I don't know if you saw similar things in a corporate environment, but at least I know I have, as folks kind of get more people under them and they run into similar problems.
The first company I went to work for out of college was General Mills. And that was back in a day when there was a lot of opportunities to grow and be promoted, and you had to usually take transfers and move around. And at one point, I was 27 years old. I'd been with the company about 4.5 years, and I got an opportunity to go to the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia market and become the district manager. Now, at that point, I would have been the youngest district manager General Mills had at the time. And I remember talking to kind of one of my mentors. I told him, I said, look, there's salespeople up there in that group that are really, really good. I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage them. And he said, look, he goes, you're not thinking right. He says, you're at a point in your career, you're at a fork where you have to make a choice. You're either going to stay in the technical side, which for them was sales and managing accounts and driving revenue, or you're going to go into the management side, which is developing and directing people. And he said, usually the people that are the best salespeople don't ever make the best managers. So if you know you're not the best salespeople, but you have all the traits of being able to develop rapport with people and develop trust with people and be able to hold people accountable and help them, but admonish them and develop them, push them beyond their own limits and have them like you for it, that's the direction you need to be going in. And that's the direction I took.
That's a good story. Because, yeah, I mean, it sounds like basically you had to develop the skills to go from being in to on in the right way on that standpoint.
Yes, and that, quite honestly, I don't work with a lot of people in startup businesses anymore because it's usually they don't have the capacity to take on the kind of things that I'm going to take them through. I'd much prefer they were out there kind of on their own for a year and a half or 2 years and come to the conclusion that this is what I know how to do and this is what I don't know how to do. And then the conversations are much more rich. But I will talk to a lot of them and just tell me where you're at. I'll tell you what you need to do. And what I find out is that most of them, after a couple of years, they kind of get to a plateau. It's a comfort level. Maybe they're not making the money that they think they need to make or want to make. Maybe they haven't started hiring employees yet, but they're at a point where they're recognizable in their community. People know what they do, and people are hiring them for various things. And what I find out is that the reason they're stuck there is because they haven't changed their mindset. They're still thinking like an employee without a boss.
That's a really good way of putting it. And I would imagine from what you've said earlier, what you probably also notice is they've put a lot more processes in place, to continue that kind of analogy of on the corporate side, if you see somebody managing a team of 5 to 10 well, they probably have some really good processes for how they manage their team. And the one that's kind of chronically saying, I don't have time, just kind of an employee among many, so to speak, they don't have the processes, they don't have the structure.
And again, this could apply to a lot of different business disciplines, but especially in the IT field, when you get somebody that leaves a company and decides to go out on their own, there's a lot of different reasons why people do that. But typically what happens is in the company they were in charge of a specific area of the technology that company provided. That's all they did, okay? And they were good at it. And maybe the clients that the company worked with, they all knew that this individual was good at that one thing. So one day they decide, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my own thing because I think I can do it better. That happens a lot. Well, what they forget about is somebody else in that company was driving revenue and was acquiring clients and was taking care of the customer service and was doing the billing and all the other back end stuff that keeps a business up and running. And now by the fact that they've stepped off the boat and onto land and standing there by themselves, they got to do all that themselves. And their number one role now is not technology. Their number one role is acquiring clients and generating revenue, because without revenue, they will cease to exist as a business at some point.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I know you must have, given your time at General Mills and just other things you've seen. I mean, people leave the big company, they move out. And to your point, I've always thought of it, they do some math in their head of some bill rate times a magical somehow being billable 40 hours a week. And the first thing I always tell these folks is like, why don't you assume you're only billable 50%? And they're like, well, what do you mean? What in the world would take up 50 more percent of my time? And I'm like, well, it's a lot of the stuff you mentioned, right? And they're like, you mean I have to be profitable at 50%? And all of a sudden you add on all the rest of the stuff, buying your own health insurance and a million other things, right? And it starts to look almost impossible that you can even actually make money. And then I think that's a better way for them to go into it, knowing that they're going to have to make things work in 50% time. But to your point, I don't think a lot of people go through that because they're in this bigger organism where they don't really understand. And they kind of intellectually understand that all that other stuff is happening. But I think they can just kind of somehow pick it up on the fly. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of clients that kind of boomerang out of the client you have with a flash and a flare, and they're going to go launch a big company, they say. And then, I don't know, 12 to 18 months later, they're either back in that company again or a similar looking company at that point.
I actually worked with a web development company about 3 years ago. And I knew the guy. He was really good at what he did. And we sat down one day and I said, Ken, tell me at some point when this thing becomes stable and you know you've got control over the growth and the direction of your organization, where do you want to be from a revenue standpoint? And he says, I want to be doing $1 million a year in business. And I said, okay, that's a nice round number. A lot of people subscribe to that. I said, why $1 million? And he told me, he said, because when I tell my friends and family I have $1 million a year business, I'm a credible business person. And I thought, okay, look, that's great logic. I can run with that. And I said, all right, so tell me, what do you charge to develop one website? And he told me. And I said, let's do some quick math. And so we figured out that he would have to build 665 websites a year in order to get to that number. And I said, do you see yourself being able to do things at that rate? And his face was white. And for the first time, he had actually come to grips with the volume that he would have to take on through him and other people in order to get to that magical number he was looking at. And he says, man, he goes, there's no way. He goes, I can't do that. He goes, I don't know anybody else that does. And I said, all right, recalibrate your expectations and build out your organization over time so that it will eventually support the kind of revenue that you want. So there is a certain mental thought process that you have to go through in order to make business building viable and realistic.
Yeah, that's a really, really great story, actually. So one last question. Just because professional services firms, as I mentioned near the start, if you're a product company, there's books written about you all the time and how to build a better product. I find that services firms get a little shorter thrift, and especially if you're in a niche, it's even harder. So what advice do you give clients when it comes to either books or blogs or conferences or things like that they should use for self-education?
I got a whole bunch of books here, but I'm going to give you one recommendation, and I'll explain to you why I'm telling you this. But one of the best sales books that I've ever read was written by a guy named Neil Rackham, and the book is called Spin Selling, SPIN. It's an acronym, but it's based on consultative sales practices. There's two kinds of selling that vast majority of people out there do. They either do transactional sales, which means you want something that I have, I'm going to sell it to you. I'm going to give you the product, you give me the money, and then we're done. And if I never see you again, so what? Okay, that's transactional. And consultative is where you acquire a client, and you may not be doing business with them every single week, but throughout a year, you're keeping them on the books as a live client. So there's more of a long-term relationship. In order to sell in a consultative environment, which I consider most professional service and IT type work to be, you have to know how to talk through that process so that the person you're talking to understands that you're not trying to sell them your service. You're trying to be a solution for the problem they have. So if you get that book and you read it, this guy goes through a very methodical, but it makes a lot of sense on how to have a conversation that can help sell services as a solution.
That's awesome. That's a really good recommendation. That is a really good book. I've come across it myself too. So Steve, I just want to thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Sean. It was a great conversation. I'm glad you had me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
And that concludes the interview I had with Steve Smith. I really enjoyed talking to Steve. He had a lot of great things to share about sales and marketing tactics and even just leading people. As a closing note, make sure to visit his site at GrowthSourceCoaching.com. And don't forget to visit us at CascadeInsights.com. Thanks for listening.